successful digital archives initiative. Distance learning is an increasingly important tool for connecting academic and cultural institutions with their constituents. Digitizing archival collections supports distance learning while increasing the impact, reach, and value of those collections. Today, we'll discuss key steps to consider when launching a digital archives initiative and the role vendors might play in accelerating the process of making digital content available to your users. We're broadcasting today from Philadelphia and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Boston, Massachusetts, Denver, Colorado, and Provo, Utah. I'm Teresa Kidd, the Backstage account representative based in Denver. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Kelly Barral is Vice President of Digital Imaging Services at Backstage Library Works. Katie Gambone is a Senior Sales Manager for Quartex at Adam Matthew Digital and a Backstage alumna. Jessica Kowalski is a Sales Manager at Adam Matthew Digital, also working with the Quartex platform. We will be recording today's presentation, and that recording, along with the slides, will be available to you in the coming days. We'll email you a link. Attendees' lines are muted, so please direct any questions or comments through the questions panel. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Backstage Library Works has helped libraries, archives, and museums preserve history for over 30 years. Our exceptional staff brings years of experience to your project, ensuring high-quality results every time. Our services can be performed at your facility or our Bethlehem, PA Preservation Center. Katie Gambone will get us started with our presentation with a brief introduction as well for Quartex by Adam Matthew Digital. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you, Teresa. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Quartex, we are a digital collections platform produced and delivered by Adam Matthew Digital. Adam Matthew Digital is a publishing company based out of the UK. We have been working with primary resource collections for 30 years to share content around the world with academic institutions. Quartex is designed for a broad range of repository needs and will receive ongoing investment and development to provide access to simple workflows and cutting-edge technology. In our platform, we have some great technology available already. We currently have OCR for print materials, handwritten text recognition for handwritten manuscript collections, and AV transcription for AV collections. You also have the ability to build digital exhibits within Quartex. We encourage you to learn more about our platform at the two websites provided here, and to reach out to us if you're interested in learning more. So I'll pause here for a second to give today's attendees an opportunity to read the quote here. We thought it would be helpful to start today's presentation with this quote that we found in a recent article from the online publication Inside Higher Ed. This quote here from Christopher Cox, the Dean of Clemson University Libraries, speaks directly to the impact that many of you on today's call may be dealing with. Social distancing, which requires a stronger virtual presence, and hygiene sensitivities that are more apparent when handling physical materials are creating more of an impetus for digitization. As a result, many of you may be in a position where you are being asked to launch a digitization program for the first time. Some may be asked to increase the volume of your work to meet increased demand. Some may have requests for material types that your repository has not supported in the past, and others may be asked to reinvigorate dormant programs. With that in mind, we'd ask you to take a minute. We'd love to know if your repository fits into any of these categories. So I believe that Richard from our team is pulling up a poll for you. Teresa, I'll let you let me know when responses are being logged and we can move on.
Sure thing. Yes, please go ahead and click whatever answer best describes how your digital repository is. We've got a lot coming in right now. give it a few minutes here. Very spread out right now. Give it another about 30 seconds for everybody to get their answer in. It looks like almost half, a little less than half, are seeing digitizing or digitizing more rather to meet increased demand, which completely makes sense. Just a few more seconds here. Okay, looks like we have a majority voted, and yeah, we have a spread of a little less than half, definitely digitizing more. And then from there, we have launching digitization programs from scratch at about 30%, maintaining status quo at 25%, which is also understandable. And then reinvigorating a dormant digitization program is 21%, 18% are being asked to support additional material types. So we're kind of across the board.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for participating in that. And I think regardless of what category you may fall into, we hope that today's session provides you with a refresher on things you may want to consider when planning a digitization project, especially if you are planning to work with a vendor to complete a portion of the workflow. So I think we can all likely agree that digitization programs are a worthwhile investment that allows us to increase access to analog materials to key constituents and even connect to new audiences. As an important investment though, digitization projects are also very time consuming and costly. This diagram here is a summary of best practices of successful digitization projects that we have both experienced working in archives ourselves and observed working with repositories as a partner. As more and more repositories are being asked to digitize collections en masse and more quickly, it will be interesting to see if some of these steps get eliminated or even condensed. The concept of more product, less process, MPLP, introduced by Mark Green and Dennis Meisner in 2005, is perhaps never more relevant than in our current situation. Ongoing improvements with technology is also making it possible to create quicker access to digital content. We'll talk about that a little more a little later. This life cycle still represents a strong guide for how to plan for either small or large digitization projects and will guide our conversation today. In looking at this life cycle, steps 1 through 3 fall squarely into the purview of each individual repository. So we'll just touch on that very briefly. Collection reception, assessment, and prioritization may be based on documented collecting practices and on a conversation among stakeholders about what content is most vital to research. We all know donor interest can also play a significant role here. Preservation and fragility of collections can also be an important factor in the ranking process. Step 3, planning funding, is, some may argue, the most critical step in the life cycle. The idea here, using a very popular carpentry analogy, is measure twice, cut once. Essentially, we must plan, and plan again to ensure that the end goal of access and discoverability of our digital collections is met. In this step, it is important to work through the who, what, where, why, and hows of your plan. Who is your audience and what is the level of expertise? How will the collection be used? What level of metadata do you need to make the collection discoverable for end users? Where will you display this information, and are there opportunities to display your assets more broadly? From there, you may want to work backwards to build your plan. So for that, we might actually suggest with starting with your systems. There may be multiple systems that you are using or may want to consider using to manage digital assets. You'll see here we have 4 types of systems listed. You are likely aware of the distinctions, but just to ensure we're all on the same page, we're just going to touch on this really briefly. So digital asset management systems provide a secure repository that facilitates the management of digital assets. These systems essentially allow you to catalog, organize, and distribute digital assets. Often tied to that is a content management system, which is basically a web publishing capability that allows you to serve up digital assets for the research community according to your style and design preferences. So it's the front-facing side of your digital collections platform. The content management system is not to be confused with a collection management system, which is more akin actually to a digital asset management system. However, in collection management systems, it is used to often track administrative details and documents that relate to an asset, as well as the metadata information. So it may include acquisition documents, conservation reports, professional appraisals, and more that you may want to make accessible to administrative staff, but not to the broader community. Many dams also support administrative data, but may not allow you to attach documentation to the records. These systems are most often found in museums, but depending on your collections, you may also have a collection management system as well. And finally, we have preservation systems. These are designed to ensure access to digital information for as long as necessary. They are critical to ensure accessibility and accurate rendering and authenticity of digital assets over a long period of time, especially as technology changes and file types that are supported may change as well. You'll notice that we have the Quartex logo listed in two places here. This is specifically the functionality that our system offers. Coming back then to our life cycle diagram, we felt it was worth mentioning systems here as the third step in the process because many systems have different requirements that may impact your workflow. Different systems offer different capabilities and different requirements that you will want to have in mind as you begin your digitization work. For example, you may need to set up your assets and metadata in a particular way or in a particular file format to ensure that they can be easily ingested into your system. Knowing that in the beginning will ensure that time isn't wasted and that all relevant information is documented in the correct way. If you have had the same system for an extended period of time and are being asked to increase your digitization presence, it may be worth looking into whether updates are available to your current system that can help save you time in the long run or enhance discoverability. It may also be worth exploring alternate systems to get a sense of what new technology is available. If you are thinking of partnering with a vendor to complete any part of the digitization cycle, it will also be important to consider the role that they will play and to get the costs of these services. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. We have listed funding alongside planning. Funding is obviously a very critical piece of this puzzle. Costs associated with the human capital required to process a collection, complete the digitization work, and to create metadata represents the bulk of the costs. Ongoing costs related to digitization equipment, if you're doing the work in-house, and systems required to manage the digital assets are also an important factor. Many digitization projects today are funded through grants, which requires applicants to document in writing the goals of the project and a plan to complete the work. It's essentially a strategic plan for the digitization project. We have found this to be a very useful exercise, even for non-grant funded projects, to ensure that projects are developed with the end goal in mind to make the content accessible and discoverable. It can also then serve as a roadmap for all individuals working on the project, which can include volunteers, student workers, and in the case of larger repositories, may actually span multiple departments that may be siloed. And so having that roadmap can ensure that everybody stays focused on the goal and their role in that process.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Thank you. With a collection in mind, funding settled, you're ready to move on to the next step. Collection processing and material preparation are critical to ensure that the library has intellectual control over the collection and has the necessary metadata and prep work completed to ensure a safe and cost-effective workflow for getting materials reformatted. Process and organize the materials based on how you'd like to see the materials structured as a digital collection. If you have a manuscript collection, you might organize the collection by box, folder, and item level. Process and prepare the collection to ensure it is camera ready. What makes a collection camera ready? Your team or vendor has chosen the digitization equipment and methodologies to minimize the risk of damaging materials during the digitization process. In order to achieve the goal, it is our recommendation that the materials be prepared by the institution to qualify them as ready. Here is a list of preparation steps that can be taken and some examples to qualify items as camera ready. Enclosures. Items have been removed from their enclosures. Staples, clips, and the like have been removed. Photos have been removed from their enclosures, like Mylar. Letters have been removed from envelopes. Items arrive flat and unfolded. In the case of newspapers, you want to ensure that they are unfolded to relax creases and that the creases are flattened. Dog ears have been unfolded. Items stored rolled are unrolled and flattened as needed. Items obscuring content have been removed. For example, bookmark, researcher notes, flags, sticky notes, and other ephemera have been removed, unless, of course, the material is meant to be digitized. When digitizing bound materials, either hard or soft cover, you want to ensure that the bindings open with ease and can lay flat and be captured as two-page spread. Covers and pages turn without breaking. Fragile and broken bindings have been removed. Tight bindings have been removed, or perhaps the strings have been cut. Again, your emphasis here is that they can be flattened with glass to ensure that they sit in the book cradle without being damaged. If the bindings are metal, you'd want to remove the items from the bindings. For example, 3-ring binders, remove the pages from the binders. Or if the books are bound with metal studs and grommets, those have been removed and disbound. Weed the items of duplicates. You want to go through the collections and either flag items to alert the digitization vendor not to digitize the duplicates, or your vendor may digitize those. If you have a photograph collection, you may have duplicates in the prints or the same content. If you have negatives and photographic prints of the same content, go through those collections and remove the duplicates. And again, only send what you want digitized to your vendor. Similar case with newspapers and other content. If you're digitizing for microfilm, the best case scenario is if you have polyester-based film and it's in good condition. If the film is acetate, that doesn't necessarily mean it can't be digitized, but you want to make sure that it isn't showing signs of deterioration and that it is stable and able to be digitized. Whether launching a digitization project from scratch, increasing the volume of your repository, invigorating a dormant program, or status quo, collections that don't qualify as camera ready may still be processed for digitization. Planning to prepare materials should not be a roadblock. A vendor partner may be able to perform basic preparation, and although material preparation may incur costs if performed by the vendor, it may not drain your budget. Always discuss your options with your vendor. When planning a digital archive initiative, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about best practices and following guidelines. The federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, or FAGI, is one example of guidelines we'd recommend familiarizing yourself with during your initial planning. The guidelines are informative and are kept up to date. The most common cited part of the guidelines are pixels per inch, the PPI, and resolution. Other parts include luminosity, non-uniformity, simply meant lighting and lens performance. Uniform lighting ensures perfect and even recording of a neutral reference from the center to the edge and in between points within the image. Color accuracy. It's just that. It measures the system's ability to record color. Focus Sfr, or spatial frequency response. This measures the ability to maintain contrast between increasingly smaller image details, ensures that the detail is able to be read and discernible. Simply stated, following best practices or industry guidelines will aid in ensuring you're creating digital content that is consistently better quality.
Thanks, Kelly. Now we're going to talk metadata. Metadata is arguably one of the most important steps in the digitization lifecycle. We've talked about how the goal of digitizing content is to increase access to these materials. However, if no one can find the materials once they've been digitized, what's the point of digitizing them to begin with? Metadata is key to making sure that digitized content can be found by end users. There are various points in the process in which metadata may be generated. For example, when physically preparing a collection, a finding aid or simple box folder listing is generated. Or during the digitization process, technical metadata is created. It could be automated and simply an output of the process. It is often once the digital object is produced that we see a bottleneck develop and projects become delayed. So why is that? When repositories are working with physical collections, most metadata is done at the collection level or maybe at the series level. But when you digitize the collection, you are in essence creating an item level access point. Item level cataloging is time consuming and requires a lot of manpower. It's an area that can add up in costs and extend the project timeline quite a bit. And what's more is that metadata in special collections have been a bit of a wild, wild west over the years in terms of quality and consistency across the field, but also within individual repositories. This means many collections may be dealing with legacy data and cataloging processes that may not meet the needs of newer collections or newer systems. Vendors like Backstage have a metadata department that can add item level cataloging as part of your project plan. That can be one way of speeding up the process. And they can also help with data cleanup if you're dealing with bad legacy data that needs to be updated. But there's other things you can do as well. And so now we're going to discuss what are some of the ways we can work through this bottleneck, and are there ways in which metadata creation can be automated as an initial access point? Kelly?
Thank you, Jessica. Metadata. Data about data. We're all familiar with the term and the definition, and as Jessica explained, the importance. Metadata creation is seated as step 7 on the life cycle. Step 7 of 9 after digitization. Well, I think this may be a case of it belongs in the cycle, let's put it here. Metadata is truly every part of every step. When you're assessing the collection, organizing and preparing the collection, digitizing, accessing, and maintaining. Metadata can be classified as descriptive, administrative, technical, and structural. Descriptive metadata. It's the who, what, when, and where for discovery and display. Administrative metadata. That's both preservation and technical data, generally used for internal management of rights, reproduction, and other access requirements. Technical metadata. This describes the digital attributes to render and display the images. It is a natural output of the digitization process. Then lastly, structural metadata. Data that indicates how a digital asset is organized. For example, how pages in a book are organized to form chapters, or collection hierarchy, box or folder, primarily for navigating the digital objects. Metadata can be created by automated processes or by manually keying data. Metadata sourcing may be library provided while organizing the collection, during the preparation, or even creating an inventory and packing list. You are essentially creating metadata. Metadata can be created by the digital vendor. Several metadata elements are, as Jessica explained, naturally created during the digitization. It may be keyed on camera or during the visual inspection, or outputs from the software and camera. Whether using basic metadata, box, folder, volume, newspaper issue number, title, or more granular data at the item level, page number, date, or details in a correspondence, following standards is recommended, and that will ensure consistency. The possibilities may seem endless, but identifying and creating metadata can be fun. Trust me on that. I encourage you to discuss your options with your vendor. Metadata that is created electronically in a universal file format, such as an Excel spreadsheet, can be a great way for a vendor to label and name digital images to form the file directory structure. We'll talk more about metadata and discoverability in the next few slides.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So we're going to discuss how metadata can provide access points in digital collection systems. Controlled vocabularies are a quick way in which repositories can create access points to collections and guide researchers through collections without needing the extensive manual data entry that's typically associated with item level metadata. And so we're going to start by jumping into Adam Matthew Digital's mass observation collection. For those of you unfamiliar with mass observation, it's a collection based on responses of those living in the UK to, on social issues of their time. And so what we're going to do is take a look. This is our newest database published by Adam Matthew using Quartex. So we can go here and take a look and browse by the directive. So these are the particular issues, the seasons in which observers receive their surveys. And we can also go here and take a look at our filter options. And so by using controlled vocabularies, we can browse either by directive, or we can see here that we can browse by key topics or by observer. So let's take a look at filtering by key topics. Just give it a moment. So we have here, when we open up this box, we can see all of our key topics. And so these are the controlled vocabularies that have been put forth as a filter option. And I loved the HBO Chernobyl series. And so I'm going to search for the Chernobyl disaster. Perform a search here. We'll see that we'll get 709 results. And so here we used our controlled vocabulary to navigate to any result that has been tagged with our Chernobyl disaster controlled vocabulary. So if we go into here, we can take a look at one of these responses. Let this open up. And so we can see here in our response, this is the summary metadata up here. There's further metadata down here in the document details. But anything in this gray ellipse in Quartex works as a hot link, so we can go and see anything that's been tagged, whether that's the observer coded with number 11, other key topics, or even the year in which this observer was born, the decade. So we can go here and see observer number 11, and we'll perform a new search, and we can observe for the first time an easy way to see all the responses from one observer. So it's a really exciting way to use controlled vocabularies, and it provides additional functionality that researchers don't get with simple paper files. And so with that, we're going to speak to a few other ways in which you can use metadata. I'm gonna just wait, here we go. So going back to our conversation, you're most likely familiar with OCR. Katie mentioned earlier AV transcription and HTR. So you could use AV transcription for audio and visual assets, and then handwritten text recognition, which we often describe as OCR on steroids. And it's important to keep in mind that all these services, none of them are 100% accurate. But what they do is that they make items more discoverable through full text search. And if we're thinking about how to create more product with less process, how to make more content more easily discoverable with less time and effort, they create an immense number of access points into materials with a low amount of effort that can always be revisited and revised at a later date. And so with that, I'd like to jump into another example for you to see. We're going to take a look at University of Toronto, Mississauga. University of Toronto, Mississauga started with just one collection on their digital collections platform, and that is their student newspaper called the Arundelian. So we're going to perform a search for Bob Rudolph. I have him right here. And so Bob Rudolph was the Student Government Association president, and he was also an editor of the Arundelian, the student newspaper. So we're going to go here and perform a search. We can see that we received 28 results with Bob Rudolph. But if we look here, we can see that we're searching on both the metadata and the full text. So by searching on just the metadata alone, we'll see that we actually wouldn't get any results, even though that Bob Rudolph, we know that he was an editor and likely contributed to the student newspaper. Rather than having to index his name manually, we can use our OCR and find him using that service. And as such, University of Toronto is just a really great example at how an institution can begin a digitization program, publish collections as you go, and use processes such as OCR or AV transcription or HTR to make content immediately discoverable for users without investing additional time in creating metadata. And so we can go in here as well, just take one last look. And so we're going to see how our search term Bob Rudolph and how that looks like in the asset and how that aids your researcher in discoverability, perhaps even more so than just simply using metadata alone. So by using the full text search, your researcher is pointed directly into the asset where our search term appears. So we can see this article by Bob Rudolph. And then we can also go over here into the transcript and follow along and find our results highlighted. Now we can also scroll down as well. And if we take a look at our document details down here, we could jump to the next point in our asset to where our search term appears. And so with that, I think we can return to the PowerPoint. Great. Of course, item level metadata is still really important. Once initial access is created through automated services such as OCR or other means, you can always go back into the system and do cataloging within the system. Today, many systems are quite flexible and offer both standardized metadata structures, such as Dublin Core, as well as customizable templates, allowing you to catalog and describe your materials according to your own collection's needs and your collection's preferences. Now, once your content, thanks, Katie. Once your content is ingested into a system, it's important to consider other ways in which you may be able to create access to assets, particularly those with high research value. For example, one way of doing that is building digital exhibits. And you can exhibit a variety of material, such as AV content. So it's important to consider whether you're maintaining multiple instances of assets that you'd like to highlight, and whether you can highlight print content, handwritten manuscript content, as well as AV content. And there's also other ways in which to create access points, and that's, oops. Thanks, Katie. And that's by maps and timelines, which are also a fantastic way to create access points. They can create new ways of understanding your collections by making associations among material types that may otherwise not be associated within your collections. And so finally, would be remiss to not mention web accessibility when discussing digitization. We need to make sure that we are providing equitable access to all users. You want to make sure that whatever system you are using is striving to meet WCAG accessibility guidelines. We've found that with our conversations with institutions that those primarily with public funding are subject to additional scrutiny. And if you aren't sure if your site and systems are accessible, ask your vendors. And there's also several assessment tools, many of which are free, that you can use on your own to test for accessibility compliance used on your digital collection systems. And finally, we'd like you to consider, how are you sharing your assets more broadly than just your digital collection sites? In terms of file maintenance, Katie mentioned earlier about considering preservation solutions. It's also critical to ensure that you're distributing assets more broadly to ensure longevity of your investment. For example, it's critical to make sure that your files aren't stored on one computer or one hard drive. Distributing your collections more broadly ensures that if files or collections aren't lost, if you lost a computer, for example. One solution worth considering then is to use cloud-based technology, which may automatically save files in multiple locations. And this provides a safeguard so that your computer, even if you lose it, you can still access your system and retrieve your files. Preservation is also a great idea, as mentioned by Katie, and it's also worthwhile to ensure that whatever system you're using has a capability to share your assets with other systems to increase discoverability. It may be that your system has a protocol already built in, or that there might be other APIs available. Whatever the case, ensuring that you have multiple access points can help to increase the success of your project by promoting discovery. You can then capture that data in terms of analytics to share the success of your investment with management, grantors, and donors. And so with that, that concludes our presentation portion of this webinar. And I'd like to turn it back over to the moderator for some Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, Katie, and Kelly. That was great content. And yeah, we'd like to open it up for Q&A. Please go ahead and direct any questions you may have in the questions panel. Of course, if it is to be designated to a particular person or to just Quartex, this Quartex service in general, or Backstage in general, if you could let me know if you would like that specifically directed, I can do that. Let's see. Sydney just put a question in here. Let's see, the example of searching full text for the Aridelian editor for Mark Rodolfo, the searcher would have to know that name ahead of time to use it as a search term. If there was an extensive index for the publication, the editor name would be in the metadata. So I guess she's just adding that additional comment to that search.
Yeah, I
did you have any comments? Go ahead.
I'll share that University of Toronto, Mississauga, the files, their newspaper were on the floor. And so they were just taking them and digitizing them and trying to get someone to be able to use them. So their site, they've actually, if anyone had seen their site a few months ago, it looked a bit different. They've been able to update their site. They're about to launch another collection on the site in September. So they're really working through it little by little. And so they've created more metadata since they launched their site about a year ago. And so it's just an example that in order to launch a site, you don't need to create a full controlled vocabulary or do all your indexing. You can still get things out there and discoverable while you can go back and do that kind of work.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jessica. Eileen was curious, what metadata field does the CV for filter for key topics come from? Is it custom?
So in Quartex, you can use the backend to choose filters. So essentially, any controlled vocabulary you could create a filter field for. And controlled vocabularies are also created by the administrator. So you, the customer, would be able to create your own controlled vocabularies and then choose which filters you'd like to show. We do have a customer, the Shakespeare Globe in London, and they actually have about, I think they have a dozen or so filters on their site. They haven't quite launched it yet, but they have a variety of filters, so you can filter on location of a play and who acted in it and who wrote it. So you could use it in really interesting ways, or you could use it quite simply, as we saw in the example with mass observation.
And it is all completely customizable by the administrator.
Okay. And we have another question that maybe everyone can speak on, but what is preservation metadata? Maybe Kelly has an opinion on that, or possibly Katie, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, so our system doesn't specifically, our system is not specifically a preservation system. So it's not metadata that we sort of often work with in our system, but certainly if you have a preservation system, you know, there may be specific metadata fields or things that are required in that.
Yeah, I think preservation metadata falls in terms of the administrative metadata. That's for your internal management of your rights and reproduction. So you may have copyright and things similar to that in with your administrative metadata.
Okay. Christine was curious if, and I believe this could definitely also be a Backstage Quartex question too, what is the difference between Quartex and Content DM?
That's a great question. So they are essentially competing systems. They are both a data asset management system and a CMS. So they have the web publishing capabilities as well.
Okay. Kelly, did you have anything else to add about any of the differences or insight into Content DM?
No, I think Katie covered it pretty well. They're both the digital asset management tools. I've had experience with both systems, and I find both are suitable. Some have pros and cons, and I think it's, you know, up to the user of what they prefer and what they're plan for with their assets.
Yeah, I would also encourage you, if you're interested in like a deeper conversation about those differences, to definitely reach out to us. We do have several clients who came over from Content DM, so we've been hearing more about some of those distinctions, and would be happy to talk about that one-on-one if that's helpful.
Okay. This is probably a great time to go ahead, Katie, and switch to the info slide. We'll just have it up for the remainder of the Q&A here, so you have adequate time to get anybody's emails that you would like to reach out about information about anything else further that we have talked about or that we maybe didn't cover fully in this Q&A session. Let's see. Pam, and this is certainly seems to be for either Jessica or Katie, can you speak a little more about how this software offers the showcasing of digital exhibits? How does it work?
Sure. So in Quartex, you can build digital exhibits for publishing to the public. And so it's a pretty simple process, and we do provide demos about how you can actually set up the digital exhibits in the back end. But one thing I would say is that in Quartex, you're only ever managing one instance of an asset. And then it's sort of a simple tagging process to connect that asset either to other collections, other assets, or to digital exhibits. So right now, we do have the digital exhibits capability. Jessica also mentioned that for showcasing purposes, timelines and maps are also a great option. And so we are in the process of finalizing a timeline feature in the platform so that administrators could associate assets with a timeline as well. And then we also do offer a bespoke map solution. And we have a couple examples of ways clients are partnering with us on that. So that's a little bit more customized for a map, but it's certainly a great way to showcase your collections depending on what the content is.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure if we'll have some good resources for you, Louis, but I'm going to ask this question and see if anyone does. Are there any websites you would recommend that offer librarian training on creating Dublin Core and MARC 21 metadata records?
I might actually recommend you check out Library Juice Academy. I know that, you know, I have used that in the past for training specifically about MARC records, but they offer a variety of trainings. And I know that metadata and cataloging is sort of a track you can follow on that. And I found those to be pretty good classes, actually. So I don't know if anybody else has a recommendation, but that's a great place to start.
Okay, yeah, Library Juice, after you mentioned that, that certainly is one that I used as well when I was in library school a bit. So that's a pretty good recommendation. So yeah, if it's something you're pursuing to try and do in-house that you wouldn't want to outsource, you know, record creation, I would also recommend Library Juice as something to start with.
I had a colleague who wanted to update some of her metadata skills, and she was able to go back to her alma mater and audit a class. And so it's an expensive way to take a college class, and you might be able to use some resources like that as well.
Well, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Jessica. Okay. Let's see, is there a standard controlled vocabulary list to draw upon? This is from Troy.
So I'm thinking like Library of Congress and things like that. And right now, there's no way to import existing controlled vocabulary, sort of like an authority control mechanism. That is something we are exploring, but certainly those controlled vocabularies can be quite large. So right now, it's all based on customized vocabularies that you may already have established and or you know, that you might want to build from scratch as you're building your collections.
I'll add to that our particular system also has some safeguards for the administrative side. So if you did upload a controls vocabulary and you had someone else working and adding to that, you can make it so that as the top administrator would have to approve it before accepting it and publishing it out for your collection.
Okay. So for this next question, Jana was curious about the OAI-PMH protocol, or the API.
Yes, so that is a protocol that's pretty common in most systems. And so Quartex has that capability built into the administrative side of the platform so that you can basically expose or harvest metadata from other systems. So for example, like if you are a repository that shares to an aggregator such as the Digital Public Library of America, you know, that OAI PMH protocol is what you would need in order to share that content. And so that's already built into our platform. Many systems have that protocol as well. If they require a different, I guess, language such as JSON, you can actually incorporate different API plugins. Usually your vendor will work with you to get those in place if they are not already in place. So again, we encourage you to talk to your vendors about where you want to share content and what kind of protocols you might need in place in your system to do that.
Okay. David, this might be also for everyone. It's concerning metadata, so jump in if you have an opinion on this. But we have been discussing organizing images, either photographs or PDFs created from Microfilm, of music manuscripts. Instead of creating metadata, we are considering a local holdings record in OCLC to show to users of our catalog that images are available. how does your perspective of metadata work with pre-existing metadata, or what other metadata are needed?
So I think in terms from a digitization vendor, we would go back to our recommendation of how your user is going to use and search the files is the metadata that you would use for your existing metadata to pull and maybe name the files. I've always recommended that if you're searching content on Microfilm now, how do you do that? If it's a collection of 50 rolls, do you have the information to say the music score that you want to find is on roll 30, and then when you access the box and put it on the reader, what are you looking at? Is there a microfilm target perhaps, and then using that. I always go back to how the users are accessing the microfilm, and that's how you want to name and build the file directory when reformatting to a digital collection.
Okay. Go ahead, Katie. It looked like. I might have just.
I was just going to that and thinking about some of this metadata and how to make things accessible. It actually might be an interesting project to kind of set up user groups and have them search for a variety of topics, or just ask them to sort of, you know, get a sense of how they are using your system. That actually might help guide, give you some guidance about what you might want to do and where you might want to put information so that you're sure your community is finding it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are both excellent suggestions to that issue, sure, for the type of metadata that is needed. Pam Johnson, which may be our last question here. So if you have any other questions that you're thinking about, go ahead and put them in the question box now so we can address them. Otherwise, we still have the contact info up for everybody to reach out further if you have things that occur to you after the fact. But Pam was curious. Also, I understand customers can set up their own controlled vocabularies. Is there a way to link to LCSH subjects?
If you have those links, you can set up a metadata field in Quartex and have the link there. So yeah, there is a way you can do that.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead, and I want to note a few things for everybody on this last slide. Of course, I've already mentioned a few times the contact info for both Backstage and Quartex and Adam Matthews. So please, you know, we're going to send these slides out to everyone with the recording, so the contact info will be there as well as the content that we've discussed today. So you will have all of this, but go ahead and write down any of these emails now if you have questions that occur to you before you get that recording, so we can go ahead and address them. We have a few webinars coming up as well, both for Quartex and Backstage, both on August 26th. So whichever seems to be a topic that you connect with more, we'd love for any of our audience today to please join us for either of the webinars we have coming up. One for Quartex is about controlled vocabularies, and for ourselves, we're doing one on improvement standards and digitizing archival collections. So I know we will have Quartex in their own, they will have their own link sent out to go ahead and register for theirs, and we will also be sending out a link to register for ours. So keep a lookout in your email for both of those links coming up. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we sign off here for either Jessica, Katie, or Kelly?
Well, I just wanted to really thank everybody for joining us today, and also a big thank you to Backstage for partnering with us on this conversation. And again, we really hope it was helpful to folks.
Thank you. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Jessica, Katie, and Kelly, for all this great information we were able to share today. Thank you, everyone who was able to tune in and listen. Again, keep a lookout in your emails for the recording so you can look at anything again that you'd like. And also, please reach out again if you have any further questions to for any of us for other information you would like from Backstage or Quartex. But we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.